Burberry has just debuted their Autumn/Winter 23 collection, finally turning over a new leaf for the company with new designer Daniel Lee. But this isn't the first time that Burberry have had to change their image, and in fact, they've had to change their image more than most luxury brands. But why? Burberry was founded in 1856 in Basingstoke in England to create men's outerwear meant to protect them from the ridiculous British weather. The founder, Thomas Burberry, began experimenting with fabric blends, coatings, and waxings to invent better and better products throughout the years. And eventually, in 1888, through his dedication, they invented gabardine, which is a fabric waxed with lanolin, which is the wax from sheep's fur. The fabric was a significant improvement on the available materials of the day. This coating allowed the fabric blend used for the jackets to be both somewhat breathable and yet sturdy, so it better protected the people wearing the jackets from the daily rain that we have in England. They had a fantastic product, totally unique for the time, but they needed people to know of their product in order to buy it. So obviously, to do this, they had to improve their marketing. This came with print advertising done in the newspapers of the day and with celebrity endorsement, where they would dress sportsmen and explorers in the Burberry gabardine to show off how good the fabric was at protecting from the weathers. But very notably, the change of advertising came with a logo designing competition in 1901 that produced the EKD logo that is still popularly used today. They found massive public success with their innovation and new branding, and so they began expanding. First to London, then to Paris, before finding stockists in New York and Buenos Aires. Burberry swiftly began on a significantly successful marketing strategy to promote them as the brand for popular outdoor sports, which at the time was like hunting and fishing. This was done by just aligning themselves with the upper echelon of the day to establish the brand as a luxury product offering, especially in regards to their take on a trench coat, which they were rebranding from a Macintosh coat as it was known before. Burberry was so successful at this point that even after a fire burnt down their original Basingstoke shop in 1906, they rebuilt better than ever, and so by the time that World War I came and men were looking for something to protect them in the trenches, Burberry was the obvious go-to for its combination of comfortable sportswear and adoption of functional for war elements. In fact, they became so popular amongst the army men that Burberry was commissioned to make even more by the British Army. This then impacted those back at home waiting for their loved ones to return, who would buy a Burberry trench to show solidarity with the war effort. By the time the war was over, the Burberry trench had evolved to include many details useful to those at war, like D-rings on the belt and a gun guard for the shoulder, evolving the Burberry trench into the standard of trench coats that we have today, which includes the changing of the lining of the jacket to include the now infamous Burberry check, which at the time was just another one of Burberry's checked patterns that they were using for the linings of things. It didn't have a significant meaning yet, but this is the first time that we notice it, so it is definitely worth mentioning. They retained a phenomenal public image throughout all of this, even earning a royal warrant as a tailor in 1919, and were already considered to be a British institution. So, when the Second World War broke out, they were once again commissioned to make clothing to outfit the soldiers. But smartly, they didn't want to only rely on wartime patriotism to foundation their business. So it was only a hop, skip, and a private airplane to Hollywood for the brand, where they would outfit Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca in 1943, and then Marlene Dietrich in A Foreign Affair slightly after the war in 1948, to concrete the trench as a timeless wardrobe staple and a fashionable choice, not only for wartime heroes. Clearly, this product placement was extremely successful. They were even granted a second royal warrant in 1955, making them the perfect investment for conglomerate Global Universal Store. Gus, which ran a home shopping empire in the UK, bought Burberry in 1955, but foolishly let the chain coast on its reputation. Despite continuing to outfit celebrities in movies, the retailer didn't invest in new designs or internal infrastructure. So when Burberry's core clientele became mainly Asian tourists, middle-aged businessmen and matrons, its image became dour and dated despite the fairly decent sales. They began licensing their brand name, logo, and check across the world, which, although it made Burberry profitable, was just a temporary plaster on the larger problem and effectively was just a very foolish decision. These years completely decimated the Burberry reputation with the cheaply made Spanish and Japanese subsidiary lines. Burberry Black and Burberry Blue specifically sold all across Asia to so much success that it amounted to $1.15 billion in sales, which is $11.5 billion in today's money. In fact, it was selling at such extreme rates that it was coming to Europe and being sold unofficially alongside the mainline, cannibalizing their mainline sales and reputation, as was the also very successful Spanish licensed line Thomas Burberry just a few years later. It is possible that this would have been less impactful if it wasn't for the ubiquitousness of the Burberry check. You see, just very shortly after they licensed their brand out in 1967, a manager from a Burberry shop in Paris, Jacqueline Dermain, decided to flip the hem of a jacket and cover bags and accessories like umbrellas in the check for a window display. This very quickly caught on with customers who really enjoyed the check as a display of wealth, especially for products like accessories. But it's important to note that this happened very slightly after Burberry had licensed out the use of the check. This meant that not only the Burberry mainline was able to add the check on products by this collection that's released in October of 1967 to help with making better sales, but so too could the diffusion lines that were able to sell the exact same aesthetic, although probably at a different level of quality, at a much reduced price. So although this did popularize the check to the world, and some iconic pieces like the umbrella, cap and scarf came from this, it also massively contributed to the cheapening of the brand image and the distrust people had with the quality of the product. Customers simply could not easily tell the difference between Burberry mainline and one of the Burberry diffusion lines. And so by the 1980s, Burberry started to have serious issues with its perception after English football fans grew a liking to the check and would wear it so commonly when causing problems on holiday in Europe that both the people and the brand got seriously negative reputations across the continent. And yet, to add insult to injury, because the check was so popular at the time, it was heavily faked by London street vendors, which meant that Burberry were not seeing the quantity of sales that most brands do when they get a viral product of this level. So not only was it very heavily damaging their reputation, but it was heavily cutting into their sales as well. This continued into the 90s, where despite getting a third royal warrant in 1990, their only truly financially successful market, Asia, was about to crash. The 1997 financial crash in Asia was tragic, both for the people in countries like Korea that really suffered from this, and for Burberry, whose sales dropped about 59% from 62 million to 25 million pounds. Their exclusive reliance on the Asian market to keep their other operations going proved now to be exceptionally foolish for a supposedly global brand. By 1998, they knew they had a serious problem. So to solve this, they hired a new creative director, Roberto Menichetti, in late 1998. They changed the name to differentiate their product from the copious amount of fakes and the global diffusion lines. And they produced a successful Menichetti debut collection for spring 1999. All these changes were spearheaded by Burberry CEO Rose Marie Bravo, and they were so successful that soon after came the introduction of 3 lines to the company: Brit, London, and Prosham. Burberry Brit provided entry-level products, of which some used the check. Burberry London was business attire that used the check more sparingly, and then Prosham was their luxury offering that only used the check either creatively or very subtly at first, or a bit later on, not at all. Prosham was the name under which Burberry presented their catwalk shows, and it was invented specifically because they wanted to distance themselves from the people and their reputation that had sullied the Burberry image and reputation, which had in fact begun to worsen. In England in the early 2000s, their football hooligan image was becoming more widespread into what was known as the chav culture, which was a group of often violent or unruly people that would purposefully cause havoc while wearing their Burberry check, which, whether fake, reall, or from the newly revived Thomas Burberry label, which just became an official Burberry diffusion line in 2003, still had large associations with the Burberry brand. So even if they were getting a sale from it, it was still massively damaging their reputation with the general public. Their first stab at combating this was with their debut at London Fashion Week with Burberry Prosham in spring-summer 2000. The first collection under the new label, but still from Roberto Menichetti, was a little rocky. It was criticised for using the Burberry check quite a lot and not being heightened enough to be considered a luxury offering. Even Menichetti complained about it himself. But the fall 2000 collection and onwards were considered to be much more successful, especially for popularising Burberry leather, though not on the same level as the big-name luxury brands who are supposedly their competitors now. But fortunately, they had a saving grace. All of this came with the beginning of a very large advertising campaign that started without naming the Prosham line, but would go on to clearly name both Prosham and London to promote the company's new image, new lines, and brand focus on Britishness. Starting from 1999, most of Burberry Prosham's ad campaigns featured famously successful British people like Kate Moss, Emma Watson, Cara Delevingne, and Romeo Beckham. But even though the campaign was very successful, and Burberry was now being valued at $2 billion, it was largely successful only in selling the Burberry trench coats and accessories due to production problems with Menichetti's family factory that was producing the Prosham line. And realistically, Menichetti hadn't seen the explosive positive success with Prosham specifically that they were hoping for. So Burberry and Menichetti soon parted ways in what seemed very much to be like a bad breakup. But at the same time, over in the States, a new trend was around the corner. As the Asia market was recovering from a major financial crash and Britain was still struggling with this massive image problem even into the 2000s, over in America, logo mania swept up the brand. And with the Americans still largely unaware of the solid image of Burberry in England, the Burberry check popped up in a few classic rom-com films like Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, White Chicks, and Mean Girls. And sales did start to improve over there because of it. But soon after, the American market was also plagued by fakes. This was an important market for the company. It had never really wavered before, always growing slowly and steadily as a market, so they didn't want to have their reputation tarnished there as well. Burberry desperately needed a change if they wanted to survive, and it was obvious that that had to come with a well-formulated plan, a vision to distance themselves from their own check fabric in a way that could bring desirability back to Burberry. So Burberry had this new vision, and yet they needed a very strong creative director to carry it out. This they would find in Christopher Bailey, who would debut his first collection with the Burberry Prosham line in spring-summer 2002 and debuted their first catwalk show in autumn-winter 2002. The design was very strong and spearheaded that crinkle clothing trend, but more than that, this partnership in itself was a marketing move. Burberry relies heavily on its heritage to sell its brand, and they always have done. So it was important to have a British person that was a respected businessman, both in Europe and America, to be the face and the brain of the company. Bailey was both. Being British himself and having worked for America-focused brands like Donna Karan and Tom Ford's Gucci since graduating from Royal College of Art in London in 1994, he was the personification of how the Burberry brand wanted to be perceived. Creative, intelligent, and British. Bailey was the perfect person to revive the brand. He completely removed the check and logos from Burberry Prosham and changed their production to instead focusing the design and product offering on exceptionally well-made luxury clothes and accessories. He even moved the fashion shows to Milan Fashion Week to display this new focus. This was accompanied by the continued advertising campaign from before, which was extremely successful by 2001-2002, in which Burberry had a 21% annual increase in global operating profits to a now 90.3 million British pounds and achieved a 10% sales increase to 500 million British pounds. Bailey was so successful, in fact, that he was made creative director in 2004 after only 3 years at the company. And with all this success, Burberry knew they were onto something. They closed the Thomas Burberry diffusion line in 2009 and kept producing collections under Bailey, focusing on quality garments without the check, and eventually managed to weather this logo mania trend that had damaged their company so drastically. By 2010, Burberry was ready to bring this new brand image that they've been cultivating all these years to the wider public in an effort to totally redefine their brand image. They've moved the shows back to London Fashion Week by spring-summer 2010, moved nearly all manufacturing in-house, and made direct-to-consumer retail their primary route of distribution, increasing 43% in 2005-2006 to 64% in 2010-2011. Helped massively by their Autumn-Winter 11 Burberry Prosham show, which was the first fashion show to be live streamed online, free to the general public. And with the adoption of their online store, being the first luxury house to find a footing in the online retail space. And so began really the golden age of Burberry. Burberry in the early 2010s was the brand to look up to. They'd pioneered luxury in the online space and carved out a new brand image, even when, at least from England, that looked to be totally impossible. Instead, this era of Burberry became known for trench coats, obviously, duffel coats, leather or shearling coats inspired by their military past, military coats and jackets in general, the occasional print, suiting, umbrellas, and the Orchard and Bloomsbury bags. By October 2013, Bailey became the CEO and Chief Creative Officer of Burberry, and they got to work on cleaning up the licensing that had screwed them over so badly before. Burberry brought back a total of 23 license agreements, including one that made Burberry check nappies for dogs, and they even managed to rename Burberry Black and Burberry Blue, their problematic Japanese licensed subsidiary lines, 5 years earlier than their contract originally allowed in 2015. Which, even if it meant giving up hundreds of stores in Japan and millions in annual revenue, was really good for the public perception and the brand worth. But everything good must come to an end. After they had a rough financial year in 2015, they consolidated Prosham, London and Brit into one See Now Buy Now collection in 2016, known as the February 2017 show, and returned the check to the catwalk in the September 2017 show. And with that, their unlucky charm, they were in for yet another few rocky years. Following Bailey's last collection, Autumn-Winter 18, that was a massive, massive success as his last collection, which was a love letter to himself as a queer person heading this luxury British heritage brand, in July 2017, Marco Gobbetti replaced Christopher Bailey as CEO, and then in March 2018, Burberry named Riccardo Tisci as the new head designer. Now with Christopher Bailey gone and the Burberry check back to the catwalk, Burberry had a string of controversies, which included destroying products to protect the brand image, debuting a new logo and monogram that was widely disliked in August 2018 that people still complain about today, Tisci's second collection, Autumn-Winter 19, having to apologize for a noose necklace, and then following the COVID breakout, sales plummeting globally, but most notably in China, where they had to close over 30% of their stores. And then in March 2021, they were then exposed for abuse of human rights for workers in Xinjiang, China. So Burberry was having another difficult time, and it was obviously time to try renewing the brand again by doing something different. They decided to let go of both Tisci and Gobbetti and instead hired Jonathan Ackroyd as Chief Executive Officer from Versace and Daniel Lee as Chief Creative Officer from Bottega Veneta for his first collection, Autumn-Winter 23, that just showed in London Fashion Week. I mean, we all pretty much knew this was going to be a major rebrand. They initially announced that they were doing this whole Daniel Lee rebrand on Instagram and on their other socials, where they showed off their new logo and their new typeface, mostly to widely positive critiques. It gave everyone the idea that we were going back to that classic Burberry that everyone has that nostalgic feeling for. And if anyone can make this happen on the catwalk, we have seen that Daniel Lee really did it. The collection was a wonderful take back to really Burberry's heritage and to what Christopher Bailey was doing there before. And honestly, I'm really glad to see that everything Tisci did has just been swept away now. I do like Tisci, but I didn't like what he did with Burberry, if I'm completely honest. So I'm really glad that we've gone back to something from before that. This is very traditional. It's very British. It's very new in that manner. We don't have a heritage brand that plays on this scale quite like Burberry. So it's nice to know that we have that offering come back. And I think it plays into the more recession core aesthetic that everybody is going up in arms about at the moment. It's certainly a way to create buzz for the company while still having wearable and commercial products. And I think this is a really interesting direction to retake Burberry in. The verdict is still out over to whether it actually will be successful, or if people are still kind of done with this aesthetic, and if it does bring back those kind of chav culture memories for people. But I think this will especially sell well in Asia because it's so well branded, so classic. And I think it may sell well in America if it brings back that logo mania, but in a heritage way. I feel like that could be a really unique selling point for Burberry. While so many other companies are going for extreme maximalism, trying to get their brand to be the most noticed, they're going back and they're doing heritage their own way in a very classic manner, in a way that distinctly feels Burberry, which kind of contrasts to what MGC is doing at Dior, which is not very traditional, but at least it's her vision. It's still minimal. It's just not traditionally Dior, whereas this Daniel Lee Burberry is really traditionally Burberry. I guess this was a really long-winded way of saying I'm actually very excited to see what's going on with Burberry now. I definitely didn't expect it to go down this direction this soon, but really interesting to see what the public reception will be to this. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. And if you did like this video, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos like this one. Check out my beauty channel, which is linked here, or you can check out my Patreon for early access to videos as well.